This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. For a full range of audio, media buying, and creative services, including podcast production, check out trisonic.co.uk.
I don't think that you can have outcomes without the right input. And I feel like sometimes the industry is missing a trick.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. One of my favorite things that we do here at the Media Leader and at our parent company, Adwanted, is really lean into and celebrate the research community in the media industry. The 2026 Adwanted Media Research Awards, or AMRAs, opened for entries at the start of the month, with the early deadline slated for October 1st and the late deadline on October 10th. And I should say, big thanks to all our sponsors that help support the awards, which will be revealed at our annual event next March. As media researchers look to submit for the awards, I thought it would be a great excuse to sit down again with Denise Turner. Turner has worked in media research for more than 3 decades for a number of leading agencies and trade bodies, and this summer she succeeded Belinda Beeftink as the research director for the IPA. For the 11th annual AMRAs, Turner will also serve as the head judge. I wanted to catch up with Turner to discuss her new remit at the IPA, how advertisers can best drive effectiveness in our contemporary media environment, and what media research is needed by our industry to improve our understanding of media best practice. This is our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Denise Turner, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me again.
And I should say congratulations, because you've just begun your new role at the IPA about a month or two, since we recorded?
So I started on the 30th of June.
Gotcha.
So I've done 2 months, although I've just been in Northumberland for 2 weeks on holiday. I would really recommend it. Do 6 weeks, get the lay of the land, go on holiday for 2 weeks, and then come back and get going properly.
The perfect start to any job. So you are just a few weeks into the role of research director. What's front of mind for you in your new remit?
So I think that one of the biggest challenges, and one of the things at front of mind for me, is actually how do we understand data? Both in terms of quality of data, how do we assess the data that we're making our advertising decisions on, but also how are we equipping the teams within the businesses to be data literate, to be able to assess those kind of decisions themselves as well. So quality literacy, and I think I think I said this, but skill sets of how do we navigate when there's so much data out there. People talk about a data lake. Well, I would say it's an ocean or a planet or whatever, but there's so much to choose from. How do you make decisions, and how do you know what the data that you're using has been collected for? And can you trust it? Can you assess it? So nothing's perfect in this world, but I think data literacy and quality are top of my agenda.
Do you think that, generally speaking, we're using the wrong types of metrics as advertisers?
I think we've got a bit seduced by things that are easy to measure rather than necessarily things that are right to measure. So there are some things where, because the data is readily available, we go, oh yeah, I'll take that as a way of measuring success. But it might be like a like or a click, or or an intermediate measure. So when I worked agency side for many, many years, and I used to develop measurement frameworks for clients, and I said there were intermediate measures, which were things like, did people go into a store? Did people visit a website? Did people do something as a result of coming across the advertising? Doesn't mean that they went on and bought it, because that's influenced by a whole host of different things. So as part of that data literacy piece, it's really understanding where those metrics fit into the measurement framework. I often talk about measurement as a bit of a pinball machine. As a consumer, you're sort of thrown into the pinball. You're seeing some advertising. You might buy something as a result, but you might just fall back out. I don't know if you've ever played pinball.
Yeah, I've definitely played pinball.
But I think that's the idea, is that it's not just a linear process. You don't just see an ad and then go and buy something, but you need to build up an association with a brand over time. And I think that focus on short-term metrics they're good because they indicate long-term metrics, but we need not to just do one at the expense of the other.
A lot of sort of younger companies, especially digital first companies that were sort of born and raised on the more performance metrics that maybe the shorter term that you're referring to, it seems like many of them do want to grow up, and that requires them embracing also different media channels and different media environments, or working with different agencies in a different way. Do you see that there's a movement maybe of maturity for a lot of the younger brands that maybe have been performance led?
Well, it was interesting, and Media Leader have run quite a number of pieces recently which have resonated with me. One of the ones that was interesting, given I just moved to the IPA from Root, was James Parnham's piece, which talked about the superpowers of different channels. No channel is going to do absolutely everything. And I think that's one of the things that, with that short-term performance metrics angle on it, is thinking about what's the superpower of a channel. It might be that the superpower of this particular channel is building up an awareness of the brand, and it might not deliver for months and months and months, but that's fine because actually it's building up an awareness of that brand in consumers' minds. So I think that whilst people would like things to be really simple, the challenge is to not just think it's a one-size-fits-all.
Almost like the challenge is not to be too lazy in your thinking in some ways.
Exactly. And I think, I've worked in this industry for over 30 years, and it's definitely got more complicated as time has gone on. But actually the principles are still the same as we define them. At the end of the day, people need to see, hear, or come across a piece of advertising in order to be influenced by a brand. Or it might not even just be a piece of advertising. It might be a shelf wobbler in the store. It might be some other interaction with the brand. But they need to come across that brand in some way, shape or form in order to have their opinions or their influence changed. That feels to me like basic principles that we need to remind people of.
I think it's easily forgotten when media is very fragmented. Right. I mean, this is sort of the common refrain ever since I've been reporting for the Media Leader for 3.5 years. Fragmentation is almost like the topic everyone always comes back to. Well, we can't really understand exactly what our media looks like because they might be interacting with it across all of these different places. Many of them are walled gardens, so you don't even have a really good view into them. How problematic is that today, or are we sort of used to this new normal?
So one of the things that I talk a lot about is content. We still love content, but we consume it across different platforms and different devices. So that's where the fragmentation comes in. But we know from, certainly from the IPA Databank and the Effectiveness Awards, that multimedia campaigns are much more effective than single channel campaigns because people consume the brand or interact with the brand in different ways. So that content is still really important. You might consume it on a TV set, you might consume it in the cinema, you might listen to it on the radio, but you're still consuming the same content. I went to see, this is saying something about me, I went to see the Thursday Murder Club at the cinema at the weekend.
Was it good? Because it looked good.
Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. I've read the book.
Yeah.
And I
Shout
watched
out
the film.
to Richard Osman.
Oh, yeah. Just brilliant. But I was thinking, immediately I was thinking, gosh, that's the content. I've read the book. I understand the story. I know the story inside out. I've read it about 3 times. And then I go and see the film and I see a different angle on the story that I hadn't really appreciated before. And I thought the casting was brilliant. I was a bit worried about Pierce Brosnan, but he was great. So that sort of content across platforms and devices. So the fragmentation actually, I think, plays to brands' strengths because you're consuming it in different ways across different platforms. And if you add that all up together, and I think that's one of the things that I'm particularly energized by is how do we measure total brand consumption or brand interaction across different channels? And also the whole idea that if you're talking about platforms and devices, the lines get blurred. Whether it's a TV set or a radio, radio. Do people still have radios? We have we have Sonos at home.
Yeah.
But, people are consuming it across different ways and means, but still consuming the content, and the content is what's driving their consumption.
Does it cause any concern that, especially given that the platforms are, generally speaking, walled gardens, that you're somewhat limited in how you're able to measure things?
The more that we can open up measurement, the better, I think, because what I certainly observe, and from my various roles over the years, is that brands want to know in totality how many people interacted with their brand, their content, their advertising. And the more that we can standardize that without it becoming lowest common denominator as well, the better. So, one of the things that sort of is on my radar to do is really to urge everybody to come together to create not a lowest common denominator, but a standardized version of how do people interact with brands. Because brands are super important in our lives. They help us navigate the complex world of making decisions about what to buy, what to do, what to see, what to watch.
I mean, there is progress on that in terms of Origin has sort of offered that it is that solution, that sort of cross-platform solution. The last time I heard you speak about Origin was at one of our own events, and you were still with Root at the time, and you mentioned that there was basically raising the concern that it's not really cross-media if out-of-home's not in it, if mail's not in it, if publishing's not in it. And I'm aware, of course, that there are ongoing talks, and Origin wants to get all of the different channels represented in that program. Is that the future of measurement to you?
I think with measurement, there is a challenge in defining what measurement is. It's an amorphous mass because it could be measurement of inputs, it could be measurement outcomes, it could be measurement of intermediate measures. So I'm also involved with the Advertising Who Cares movement, and I run the measurement and accountability work stream. And I think one of those things that really strikes me is, are you measuring inputs, but are you measuring outcomes? And I think with Origin, gosh, they've taken on a big challenge, and they've got linear TV, display, video, yes, not out of home or print or radio or any of those other channels yet. I think it's a watch and wait and see because, to be honest, I think it's laudable what they're doing, but it's not the answer to everything at this point in time. And I think I would urge any advertiser or client to have a think about actually which part of the measurement process are you trying to solve. Is it about whether people are coming across your advertising? And, is it about deduplicating reach, or is it about measuring inputs, or is it about measuring effectiveness? And I think we need to be really clear about which part of the measurement process we're looking at. And I think what Origin are doing is really trying to drive that forward, but we need to watch and wait and see.
It seems like most of the industry is moving in the direction of outcomes-based measurement. The broadcasters certainly are working on that with Lantern. And if they're doing it, that's sort of responding to a lot of the demand, frankly, from clients, especially some of the smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses that are increasingly attractive to broadcasters trying to get SMBs basically involved in grow the pie. And that's just broadcasting, but it's true of many different channels, right? Everyone seems like they're going after some portion of the long tail. And a lot of what's appealing seems to be outcomes.
I don't think that you can have outcomes without the right inputs. And I feel like sometimes the industry is missing a trick without thinking about the inputs, because it's a bit like rubbish in, rubbish out, isn't it? If you have the wrong, it's back to my data quality thing. If you have a wrong input, you can do all you like, but your outcome is going to be rubbish as well. So, and I think outcomes are sexy, inputs are not sexy, but they're super important. Did you reach X percent of 65-year-olds? Did you reach Y percent of 40-year-olds? Were you representative of the audience you're trying to target? And how do you know you're representative? That's why the inputs are really important. So I think there's a tendency these days for people to take shortcuts when it comes to that. But the inputs are super important, because without the right inputs, you can't have the right outcomes or trustworthy outcomes, is what I'd say.
What are some types of inputs? You mentioned sort of making sure you're reaching the right audiences.
So, for instance, if there are 20 million people in the UK, for instance, they're not, they're more than that. But are you reaching, what are the proportion of people of that 20 million that are 16 to 24s, 25 to 34s? Are you reaching the right proportions of those as a proportion of the population? Because otherwise you're saying that, well, I'm reaching X percent of people, but are you reaching all young people? Are you reaching all old people? Are you sort of representative of the population you're trying to target? So, I'm over 50 now. Saga seems a mile away from where I would like to be. but am I, if I was Saga and I was targeting somebody, what are they, over 50? Am I reaching the right number of over 50s? Am I proportionately representing the target audience that I'm trying to get hold of? So that's the bit that I think we need to, and it seems really basic, to be honest, but actually it's really important. Are we reaching the right number of people in the right target demographics, or the right diversity groups, or whatever it is, or the right gender, or how do we navigate all of that complexity and come out with a number that makes sense to a brand owner?
How does modeling factor into that conversation? Because it feels like when I've talked to other measurement experts, they're starting the measurement process at the very beginning of the process now, the media planning process. You measure first in some ways, because you have all this data from the past, who knows, decades now of audience measurement. You can sort of predict things a little bit easier. Does that mean that whoever's the sort of lead measurement person on your team is needing to be much more involved in the process?
I think there's two things that really strike me from your question, Jack, which one is that measurement does need to be a forethought, not an afterthought. And that's something I've said quite a lot over the years. You need to start with the end goal in mind. What do you want to do? So I've probably bored everybody senseless with this anecdote, but I read a book called How Big Things Get Done. And it's basically a Danish professor who talks about various projects. He built a database of something like 5,000 projects, ranging from the building of the Sydney Opera House to the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao to people's kitchen renovations. And he talks about the concept of thinking from right to left. Start with your end goal in mind, but you need to work out how you're going to get to the right from the left. And I think that people too often don't start from the end goal in mind. So that's one thing. I think the other thing, and it strikes me what you said about actually things don't change so much. They don't change so much. People, I don't know whether you've read, Trajectory released a report recently called Slow Futures. And they talked about the fact that we still spend, and I'm going to get these numbers wrong, sorry, Trajectory, but, 37 minutes a day eating, and we still do that 20 years on. So there are some things that don't change. And I think the inclination of the industry is that things change much faster than actually they do. So it's sort of balancing those things of the short-term changes with actually there's a lot of stability in terms of how people make the decisions. The means by which they make their decisions might change depending on the circumstances, but actually the decision-making process is actually not that different. So, and I think the media industry today is thinking too much about everything's got to change, everything's changing. It's not. Actually, human beings are still human beings.
A lot of the behavior that goes into a purchase decision, broadly the same. It's just maybe some of the inputs, or dare I say the touch points, which, to borrow from IPA jargon, that people are interacting with.
Yeah, that's not really changed. It's just it's back to my piece about content and devices or platforms. you just might consume that content a different way. You might interact with that brand in a slightly different way, but you're still interacting with the brand. That's the basic premise of what we're trying to measure.
I've referenced the touch points, IPA touch points. You also have the regular bellwether that you come out with, which we love reporting on each quarter. The IPA this year also released a number of great pieces of research. They include about ageism in the ad industry, which we've referenced in a prior episode of the podcast, as well as changes to agency-client relationships, which is also something that we talked about on the podcast. So in some ways, actually really setting the agenda for the whole industry is now what you're tasked with. So I'm curious how you're hoping to develop on those topics, or if there's other topics of interest that, now that you're coming in as the research director, areas of interest that you think the industry should be clued into.
Well, it's really interesting about Touchpoints, because Touchpoints is coming up to its 20th anniversary next year. Mm-hmm. So it was launched in April 2006. Yeah, 2006. And I was pregnant with my second child. And we joked, because there were three of us who worked in media agencies at the time, that all started on the Touchpoints project, ended up getting pregnant and having babies. So I'm going to bring them all to the Touchpoints 20th anniversary party in June. But I think it's making sure that what's lovely about something like Touchpoints was that it's a timeline of people's behaviour. So back to that bit about some things change, some things don't change. So what we've observed with Touchpoints is that, yeah, people still love content. They just consume it differently these days. But actually the basic principles are still the same. So one of my plans is really just to look at Touchpoints going forward, and Touchpoints at 20. What do the next 20 years look like? I have no idea, by the way. But I'm willing to give it a go.
I'm excited to see a crystal ball moment from you.
And then I think what the IPA needs to do from a research perspective, and you've alluded to this with things like the ageism and the Price is Right bellwether, is shine a light on the areas that the industry needs to look at. Because when you're in the thrust of commercial decisions and planning things for brands, you don't always get the time to take a breath and look at what else is going on. And I think that's really key for the IPA in terms of the role, is highlighting these things that, things like, well, how do we properly remunerate agencies? How do we, take a temperature of what's going on in the world, like as the Bellwether report does, and then be able to talk to clients about that. So the IPA provides that service and provides it in a really independent way, actually, but gives people the ammunition to have conversations with clients about that. And I think that's really important. And I love it. I think it's really good. I used to be the spokesperson on the Bellwether report when I was agency side from a media research point of view.
And look at you now.
And look at me now. Who knew? But I think it is really important just to give people the tools to have conversations. And I think that's the role of the IPA, is to give people the tools to have conversations with their clients about what's going on, what matters, what's important.
What other topics do you think the industry isn't paying close enough attention to and really should?
Well, it's interesting because you've mentioned quite a few of the things that I would have thought about, like ageism. We talked about that a little bit. Talked about properly remunerated for good work that you do. I think those are the main things. And I think, back to my media stuff, I'm obsessed with, how do we properly represent how people consume advertising and content. Those are the sort of things that I'm also thinking about. How do we properly represent the success of advertising? It's not just all about whether people went and bought a product. It's what do people think about a product or a brand? So how do we measure success? And what does success look like for a brand?
Almost like bringing the behavioral perspective in, but then also the perception aspect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine very challenging to try and pull that off. But I wish the best of luck to you.
Thank you. I'll do my best.
So by the time this episode airs, the 2026 Adwanted Media Research Awards will be open for entry, and you are leading the judging panel. What do you look for when you're considering how to rank other research projects in the industry?
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I always love judging awards. It takes time and effort, don't get me wrong. But I always think, gosh, why didn't I think of that? I love that feeling when you read an entry and you go, wow, that was amazing. So that's my litmus test, really, is could I have done that? Would I have done that? Would I have been clever enough to do that? Probably not. But I think, it's telling a great story. And I think it's really difficult as a researcher. And what's lovely about the AMRAs is that it gives research a chance to shine. But equally, I think you can almost overdo it sometimes. So my advice to any entrants would be just tell your simplest story, make it shine, and tell me why this entry should win. Because the research powers a lot of what we do in the industry, and it's often the unsung hero of what goes on. So I would really like to see it shine.
There's a new AMRA this year for the best use of AI in a research project. I'm curious, how are researchers, to your knowledge, using AI generally as part of their research projects? And does it give you any concern as a researcher?
A little bit of a concern, to be honest. And I would like any entries that use AI to highlight that they've used AI, because actually it's quite hard to tell sometimes. I was listening, when I was on holiday last week, I was listening to the radio, and they were having a discussion about AI. And one of the presenters said that they'd asked it to write their obituary.
Okay.
That's a bit drastic, isn't it? But it had said in this obituary, she was a brilliant mother of children. She had no children.
Right.
So I'd really like, I don't mind use of AI because I think it has its place, but I'd like it to be highlighted.
Yeah.
That it's been used.
I remember when we were testing, this was early ChatGPT, so now this is, I'm sure the model has improved, to be fair, to OpenAI. But I asked it to write a bio for myself, and it said I was a Pulitzer Prize winner, which was news to me, but I was very glad to be able to brag about it.
Oh, so what did you win it for?
That didn't say. My reporting, my phenomenal reporting, of course. But yeah, I mean, there's that issue. It sounds like what a lot of researchers seem to be leaning on AI, or at least considering AI for, are creating sort of synthetic focus groups or synthetic data to pull from. And I'm just curious, I don't know if you tooled around with it at all, but how reliable you think that type of use case is.
I think it needs the same kind of governance as any research project, to be honest. And I wonder whether part of the challenge for research these days is creating the governance around it and the use case around it. Because I think part of the problem is that people think it's an easy way out, but it's not. Still requires the same kind of definitions, the way we talked about, how many 15 to 24s or whatever, still requires that same kind of governance around it. And I think people think that they can do away with some of those checks and balances. It still needs checks and balances. So I'm not against it at all. I think we're still relatively in the early stages of using it from a research perspective, and it can make things easier. But let's not forget what the risks are with doing that.
Sure. What would you say, looking back on recent years, obviously not any research projects that might be up for nomination this year, what would you say are some research projects that have really set the conversation in recent years?
The ones that really stood out for me are ones that highlight the human connection that people have with brands. And that sort of goes against the grain of AI in a way, doesn't it? But it is remembering that real people buy products. It's not devices that buy products. And that human connection, somebody talked about, to me the other week, about the connective tissue between humans and brands. And I think that's really important. It's remembering that it's Joe Blogs or whoever that buys, this washing powder or that car or that dishwasher or whatever it is. Those are the things. And why did you decide to advertise where you advertised? What was the research that you did that really helped inform that decision making? So I sort of almost want to see the journey that people go through in making that decision. And that really brings it to life for me. That's super important.
Research is thoughtfulness.
Yeah,
really.
Definitely.
Well, a lesson for everyone, I'm sure. Denise, I think that's a great way to end it. I really appreciate your time as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.